Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about some really powerful legendary lords that have horrible campaigns. What do I mean by powerful legendary lords? I mean, of course, legendary lords that have good lord effects or faction effects, good skill lines, and good races behind them. Unlike, say, Boris Ursus, who, although he is a good legendary lord, he is a legendary lord of Kislev, and Kislev has a significant number of issues. That's why he's not on this list, even though I was interested in adding him in. That's because, although you can certainly make his campaign work, unlike Catherine and Kostaltin, which just have nightmarish campaigns, you certainly can make Boris Ursus' campaign work. But the thing about it is that Creative Assembly's intent was for you to fight over here, not for you to cross the sea and go invade Kislev and take Prague by force and help it by force. That's probably against his campaign design. But you can do it. However, his campaign design is really bad. That said, Kislev is a really horrible race at the moment. They do certainly need improvements to their economy, to their campaign mechanics. So it wouldn't be fair to put them on this particular list. Though, certainly, Boris Ursus doesn't have an especially well-designed campaign. Though, interestingly enough, it is a campaign you can certainly make work very well. But anyway, let's get into it. Starting with Throt the Unclean of the Skaven. Now, the Skaven are a good race, though they're not one of the best races. They do struggle due to some problems in Hot-Resolve, as well as certain limitations on their economy, but overall a pretty good race. And Throt's certainly a really powerful legendary lord. Between his campaign effects, his lord effects, like just being able to summon rat ogres, is a pretty substantial amount of power for any particular battle. So a good amount of power, good abilities, good campaign mechanics. I personally really like the Flesh Lab because it allows you to really customize your entire army and gain a significant amount of strength with that army. Of course, it can go wrong, and you may lose some valuable units if you do that, though you can recycle units for growth juice. Obviously, there are downsides in his campaign mechanics, but overall they're pretty good, pretty strong. Not everyone's cup of tea, but can be pretty fun, pretty interesting. However, his campaign situation is horrible in a lot of ways. And it's not necessarily because of what Creative Assembly decided to do. Obviously, Throt should start and help it, given lore reasons. The issue is that Kislev's design in these provinces, the Western Oblast, Troll Country, even the big cities, is not necessarily very well thought out. The big cities are not that great for Skaven. The small provinces with no provincial capital, not great for Skaven. The reason behind this is the way the Skaven economy works. So Skaven generate very little income from individual settlements. The way they make money is by building a reactor building. Well, you can't do that because you don't have a proper provincial capital in any of these minor provinces. And while you can do it for the big cities, they're not going to necessarily have the building slots in the same way like something like Hellpit can, in order to really take advantage of them economically. So a lot of the territory here that surrounds you is not really that great for you. The only benefit you can get from this territory is there is a commandment that you can use to generate some extra food, 2 extra food. Oh yay, 2 extra food. Great, really great. So a lot of this stuff, a lot of this territory, which by the way isn't necessarily easy to take for a Skaven, because you as Throt only start with the ability of recruiting clan rats. So your campaign start can be pretty slow just because you start with a tier 1 settlement, you can only recruit clan rats. It's going to take you a couple of turns to get your unit production, your proper unit production up to speed. So you need to get Hellpit to level 2. Yes, you could abandon it, use food, all that to get it to a higher level, but even then you're still looking at several turns in order to be able to get unit production where you need it to be. That's one problem in starting with Hellpit at tier 1. The other issue is, of course, just you're going to be fighting some difficult battles, actually, in a lot of ways against Kislev. You can obviously rush Kostaltin in particular, and for little gain. Now, after you, assuming you do deal with Kislev, if you decide to go down that path, the only territory that's really available to you is the Ostland. If you go into the Ostermark early on in your campaign, you're going to encounter both Drycha and Azak. And one of the issues Skaven can face in their campaigns is virtually every other race hates them. With the exception of the factions of Chaos, but even then, even Chaos doesn't particularly like them, it tolerates them, at best. So you can end up in a war with a lot of neighbors and things can escalate out of control. If you end up having to fight Drycha early on, relatively early on, like within the first 20 turns or so, or even earlier in your campaign, you're kind of screwed. Because she has a much more powerful army than you. Hell, I'm sure you could throw 3 full stacks against Drycha as the Skaven, if those stacks are made up of Skaven slaves and clan rats, and she would defeat them with ease, given her leadership debuffs, her army debuffs, and the sheer power of her army. So going south, at least in the Ostermark, is not the great plan. Going to Ostland, of course, is viable, but that's kind of where it stops. Because Midland, Fest is going to control parts of it. Hockland, he's going to control it. So you're going to have issues in terms of your expansion path. And it's not just issues that you can deal with within the first few turns. See, that's the problem in Throt's campaign, unlike every other Skaven campaign. I mean, let's just look at Ikiclaw over here. You can't really take Astalia because Mogr on Legendary very hard is going to burn it to the ground and put up a hurt zone. And that can create issues in your campaigns. Your best so you don't really want to advance west. What you do is take Tabaro, you sack it over and over again for a couple of settlements, coming back in your territory to recruit more units, and you're basically waiting for Aranessa to besiege the Tylian capital. Then you declare war on Aranessa, you annihilate both Aranessa and Tylia and take all this territory. It sucks that you have to wait a couple of turns for that to happen, but it is a viable campaign plan. It does work, and then of course you expand it to Araby. Belagar may be an issue, but you have 2 provincial capitals here to basically hold them back. That is not a luxury that you have if you have as Throt. So your best bet isn't to actually go to war against Kislev. Yes, you wipe out the Druzina Enclave, you take this particular territory, or you set up some underways over here. Maybe, though bear in mind the Zazel can ruin that particular plan. So you take this particular province, or you may abandon it very quickly. And then you advance over here in Kraka-Drak. Now, that in itself is an issue, because on very high difficulties, on low difficulties, not really an issue, but on high difficulties, the dwarves over here are going to get the full stack, or maybe even one of that, more than one of them. And those stacks are going to have some heavily armored units. The dwarves, if you allow them by the AI, they can be pretty dangerous. When controlled by the AI, because the AI has good growth, extra unit recruitment, better casualty replenishment. You know, all those issues that dwarves struggle with, yeah, the AI dwarves don't have. So if you go directly to war against Kraka-Drak, you're basically going to get... You're going to suffer. You could defeat them, of course, AI versus player, but it's still a difficult situation. Your best bet is to wait for Trog to come over here in Kraka-Drak. Like, you just do what Ikiclaw does, sack this element over and over again, recruit units, and then you take advantage of the fighting between Trog and Kraka-Drak to take over Kraka-Drak for yourself, even if you have to defeat Trog. Like, just sack this element, come back, recruit, or get the second army, start recruiting, spam the clan rats, and then take this territory. The problem is, of course, Kislev is going to declare war on you and come against you, but Helpet can defend itself. It does have a fairly substantial garrison. But the issue is, once you take Kraka-Drak, you don't really have any other territory to expand into except going to Kislev. Sure, having a full province of territory, maybe 2 if you decide to eliminate Trog, can be good. And you might take this province and sell it to Norskans because it is Chaos Wasteland. It's not that great. Or you would have to pay extra for this, but it still can generate a good amount of income, even though it's unpleasant. But then you're still left in the same situation. Going east is a really bad decision, because eastward you have this fella right here, who can be a major issue. You might want to ally the Skaven over here, maybe take the Eastern Oblast, sell it to them to get some money, but you certainly don't want to take this particular province, because, yeah, Grimgor is coming. And you don't want to help the Skaven unless you want to have overwhelming force to do so. So what you do is you take Kraka-Drak, then deal with Kislev. By that point, hopefully Drycha and Azak have dealt with each other, but still, it's going to be a rough time in this campaign. It is interesting to see how a campaign with so much power can be such a problem. It's not... I wouldn't necessarily describe it a hard campaign, though. I would more so describe it as a very, very annoying campaign to deal with because of the limited expansion opportunities. What I consider a hard campaign is a campaign where, regardless of what you do, things can end up going to shit. That's one of the things that does happen in Malekith's campaign, for instance. As Throt, you do have the ability to prevent that from happening, but it isn't a great campaign situation, regardless. Moving on, we have Drycha for the Wood Elves. Honestly, I could have put any Wood Elven campaign on this list, though I think Drycha has the worst campaign out of all of them. A ridiculous level of power. For every other race that surrounds Drycha, my advice is when you're dealing with her, you don't pick a direct fight against her unless you have overwhelming force, and even then it's still a pretty difficult fight. Like, her army is so ridiculously strong that she can genuinely take 3 full stacks of pretty good units and still win. That is how good, and that's early on in her campaign. Let's not even talk about what she can do later on in her campaign. But how is she able to do that? Well, it's a combination of factors. See, she can recruit Treekin very quickly in her campaign. Like, within 2 turns, she can get the structure to be able to recruit them. And they're malevolent Treekin, so they have frenzy. Beyond having fear, massive amounts of missile resistance, physical resistance, just really ridiculous units. She also has the ability of recruiting wild spirits and also upgrading these tree spirit units. So Treekin with 20 extra armor. That is pretty insane. Like, just baseline Treekin are pretty damn good with their 90 armor. You improve that by 20, you certainly get some of the best, if not the best, monstrous infantry in the entire game. Let's not even talk about the malevolent treemen, malevolent dryads. But it's not just that. See, Drycha has the ability of really improving these units and having a particular playstyle that makes those units ridiculous. The thing about Drycha is that she obviously has fear, which will reduce leadership. Then she has some pretty powerful magical abilities over here. Like, she starts with 3 abilities. She can really debuff an enemy army through abilities, for her legendary hero Coadil, as well as through her item, which makes casting a difficult proposition. So a ridiculous level of power here. I wouldn't necessarily focus too much on her magical skill early on, because you do need that melee skill, but she does have quite a bit of magical potential. Like, get the Deadly Onslaught, or at least get the armor benefit for her, and then focus on magical ability. That would be my personal advice over here. Like, you don't necessarily have to spend too many points over here in Drycha, but still, when it comes to it, you do want to get her durability up. That's one of the things. Not necessarily her damage or melee attack, but still, melee defense can be nice. But you can get a great deal of magical power. She has a really powerful army. Probably flat out the best in the game, to be quite honest. Like, she's not the best Legendary Lord combatant, Malice Darkblade and others, certainly much better. But the units she has, ridiculous. But that's kind of the problem. You have a really powerful army. You start with 1 Amber. Her research tree is kind of a mess because it wasn't, like, it's not a unique research tree. She was a free DLC Legendary Lord. She doesn't start with the Oak of Ages, so her campaign is going to be limited. She has to conquer the Oak of Ages from Orion. Basically, she has to conquer Athaloran, with the exception of Durfu. Though it can be tricky avoiding a war with Durfu when you're picking a fight with Athaloran, I gotta say. But you do want to confederate Durfu if you're playing a Drycha. So she has limitations. She's the most limited Wood Elven campaign because she can't confederate the other ones. It's not necessarily a problem of strength. It's just the implications therein. But she's certainly top dog. The thing is, though, you're not really going to face any kind of level of challenge in this campaign. You're just going to go from battle to battle, steamrolling every single enemy that you have. Seriously, this is the kind of campaign where you can put the endgame crisis at turn 20, or the ultimate endgame crisis. And by the way, you have quite a few locations close to you for that endgame crisis. You have the vampires, you have the dwarves, of course, next to you. And the Skaven over here. But you could enable the endgame crisis pretty early, and you might be able to win, even if you set it very, very early in this campaign. It is so bloody ridiculous for this. You can make great alliances with the Empire, with Kislev, or make alliances with Vlad, dependent on what kind of endgame crisis you're going to get, or what options you have selected there. You have choices. But yeah, you're the most powerful faction over here by far. You can pick a fight with everyone around you, and no one is going to be able to stop you. I mean, even as a Ryan, if you just flat out declare war on every faction around you, that's Ikakla, Belagar, Mogur, it could be a hell of a fight. You can win it, but it can be difficult. Compared to Drycha's situation, no one is able to stand up to her. I mean, Azag, I suppose, to an extent, if you let them take a lot of territory, but you don't let them. You take Ostermark and then you just march and annihilate Azag. He's not going to stop you. Vlad's not going to stop you either. That's the thing, because while Vlad has a lot of combat power, his army is significantly weaker than yours. In a campaign where you're just annihilating your enemies from turn 1, where no one can stop you, where you're the strongest faction by far, and you don't have any opponents, is not really a great campaign, I have to say. Yes, you can play in a very gimmicky way or choose some ridiculous, stupid challenge if you so desire, or do something like declare war on all other factions around you. But even if you declare war on other factions, it's just going to slow you down as Drycha. It's not going to stop you. That's kind of the thing. It's going to slow you down because of war's growth. It's going to slow you down for a number of other reasons, but it's not going to stop your progress. Because, again, you can recruit Shriekin from 2 turns in. That's not something they can prevent. And when you get a lot of armies to fight, this is the thing about declaring war on a lot of factions. Let's say you're that insane to do so. You got a lot of money from the battles you're fighting, so that means more armies to throw against your enemies. More units, more structures, all that. Only limitation, of course, would be growth, but still. Ridiculous level of power in this campaign. And the problem with the Wood Elves is just that. They have very easily defensible settlements, especially if you start constructing garrison buildings over there. They have settlements that are very, very, very easy to defend, very hard to attack. They have powerful armies, and they don't really care about territory, so their campaigns are all pretty bad at the moment, unfortunately. It's kind of silly, because it is a great idea to have a different kind of campaign style, but what it means in practice, this kind of defensive-oriented campaign, is you're just dominating your opponents, and because you don't really need the territory under your direct control, with the exception of getting some growth in the nearby woods, but because you don't need the territory in the nearby settlements, because obviously it doesn't generate income, you just sell it to other factions, get amazing diplomatic relations, and then just use those allies as the defense layer against your territory. It gets a bit ridiculous. Now, speaking about overpowered legendary lords and races that have bad campaigns just because of their power level, we of course have Archaon the Everchosen. Now, the Warriors of Chaos have a lot of issues at the moment in terms of having enjoyable campaigns, just because they're so powerful compared to other factions, and because of their ability to get vassals. See, the thing is, vassals can have limitations, but they can be damned useful, because on the highest difficulties, every single one of your vassal, doesn't matter if we're talking the minor Norscan vassal or something as substantial as Boris Ursus, they're all going to generate at least a full stack, maybe even 2 stacks, dependent on how much territory they have. They won't necessarily expand very quickly, but they will provide the defense layer in your campaign, similarly to how military allies can do for the Wood Elves. Now, Archaon is ridiculously powerful. It's either him or Be'lakor that are the 2 most powerful legendary lords for the Warriors of Chaos, or even the 2 most powerful legendary lords in the game flat out. Drycha has a better army, but faction effects, Be'lakor and Archaon are insane. Now, Be'lakor has the benefit of starting with all the gifts of Chaos unlocked. You have to unlock them as Archaon. The difference between the 2 of them, I would say that Be'lakor is stronger earlier on, but as the campaign progresses, Archaon is far stronger, because he gets that research benefit, he gets that diplomatic relations benefit, and souls benefit for every single one of his vassals. And there's quite a few of them around him. Like, he can get 10 vassals pretty quickly. Like, let's say within the first 20 turns, he can get 8+ vassals, depending on how you're playing this particular campaign. And a bit of luck, a bit of RNG, if like certain factions can survive until to the point where you can vassalize them, or if they get wiped out. But either way, you can get a substantial amount of vassals. That means you're going to have 8 military allies, each of them with a stack to defend your territory. And all of the initial dark fortresses that you have 4 next to you, they're all heavily defended. Like, dark fortresses are not easy to take, and the locations they're in, deep in these territories, makes them very, very defensible. This campaign similar to Drycha is you have a stupid level of power. This is the case in every Warriors of Chaos campaign, but the difference between Archaon and even that standard of the other Warriors of Chaos, or even the Wood Elven standard, is that you can declare war on every faction as you encounter them playing as Archaon, and you will not lose the campaign. That's because you start here, right? You're going to have limited vision. And when you encounter factions for a lot of the early game, they're going to be pretty damn minor factions. Like, there's no serious level of resistance you're going to encounter here, with the exception of Grimgor. And to be quite blunt about it, you can defeat Grimgor in a campaign. Maybe even make him your vassal, and then unleash him on your enemies. But no other faction around you has the level of power to be able to stop you. So, it's a pretty dull campaign from that perspective. What I would say makes the really horrible campaign in a lot of ways, and I do understand why people voted the way they did in the poll, but for me this is genuinely the worst campaign in the game. Lots of power, lots of good mechanics, powerful Legendary Lord, great Lord effects, you name it. But here's the thing, you take this element, then you start taking vassals, and what makes this campaign horrible compared even to the other Legendary Lords of Chaos is that in other legendary campaigns or legendary lord campaigns of the Warriors of Chaos, you'd at least have some major foes to fight. Like if you're playing as Azazel, you have Kislev to fight. If you're playing as Festus, you have Karl Franz to fight. Though the Empire is kind of pathetic, but still, the Empire can put up a fight to a certain extent, compared to what Archaon has to deal with, minor demonic factions and minor Norscan factions. Be'lakor, yeah, he has a lot of potential foes around him. So virtually every other Warrior of Chaos Legendary Lord has some opponents to fight from the start of their campaign. Or they will get them pretty quickly. Like if you're playing as Kolic, yeah, you can vassalize Grimgor very quickly, but then you can go into Cafe, and that's a pretty good campaign plan because there's a lot of Dark Fortresses here. As Archaon, you take these vassals, and the best campaign plan is you send some armies to expand east, you sneak up on Kolic, you force confederate him here. You might send more substantial armies to deal with Grimgor and Cafe, but that's the only fight you're going to have in this entire campaign, if you decide to do it, like if you decide to expand east. But if you go west, you start getting Dark Fortresses after Dark Fortress after Dark Fortress, lots of vassals, lots of power, and you don't really encounter any major faction that can stop you in any way except Malice Darkblade. Thing is, while Malice Darkblade is powerful, his army is not. So you can and will defeat him. And that's it. Malice Darkblade is the only speed bump you'll encounter. Boris, yeah, he has a powerful army. He won't be able to stop you. Malice might, assuming he doesn't lose a substantial number of troops to the enemies he's fighting from the very start. And then no one else can. Sigvald might be able to put up a decent enough fight, but it's worth knowing that this territory is very easy to take by factions. This is one of the reasons why Sigvald actually ends up creating one of the largest, if not the largest, AI empire for the Warriors of Chaos, because he has a bunch of Dark Fortresses, a bunch of easy enemies, and it's your best campaign plan. That's the thing. It's so horrible and so boring and so dull and dreadful because you're spending dozens of turns expanding across here, but you'll become ridiculously powerful in the process, beloved by all the other factions. Like, no other Chaos faction is ever going to declare war on Archaon because of the major diplomatic benefit he gets. Hell, you kind of have to stop yourself from making military alliances with everyone because you do want them as a vassal. But you could, like, get enough minor factions as vassals in your initial territory, and you're going to be beloved by all the Warriors of Chaos. But you don't want that. You want to take them, vassalize them, or force confederation on them. So your best campaign plan for, like, the first 40, 50 turns, which is dreadful, is just to expand across here. And that is boring as dirt, because none of the factions here are going to stop you. And then secondary armies, tertiary armies dealing with Kolic and Village. You can sneak up on Kolic and just take the challenge stone when he only has one Dark Fortress and force confederation on him. That's how you deal with Kolic. You don't even face his army directly. You could possibly do something similar to Sigvald, though it's unlikely you'll be able to do that. You might manage it against Valkia, however. And then what? Okay, let's assume you've captured this vast swath of territory. Oh, you might encounter a challenge in Malekith and Hellebrand? No, you won't. You throw multiple stacks of troops at Valkia Amalekith and Hellebrand, you take them out, vassalize them, and you just keep heading onward. If you want to beat the endgame crisis for the High Elves, you can beat the endgame crisis. The level of power this campaign has is extreme. The best way to play this campaign is to play it in a really boring and horrible way. And it's not like you necessarily have better choices. Even if you invade Kislev, right? Like, let's say you do decide to pick a fight. None of the factions that you could pick a fight with are going to be able to stop you. Kislev won't be able to stop you. If you decide to declare war on the entire world, the world won't be able to stop you. They might slow you down, but they won't be able to take you out. That's the thing about this campaign. So great campaign in terms of power level, great armies, great faction effects, great lord, but boring as dirt in a lot of ways. Moving on, we have Prince Imrik of the High Elves. Now, the High Elves are a pretty strong race, but they can start out a bit weak. That isn't generally a problem in any other High Elven campaigns, but it is a problem in Imrik's campaign, because Imrik just isn't really going to be able to leverage the strengths of the High Elves until much later on in his campaign. Like, it's turn 10, and one of the things you really need as the High Elves are trading partners. Well, none of the factions around you, even the Dwarves to the west, none of them really like you. Like, sure, you could get a declaration of war on Vermin, start getting a non-aggression pact to Karakazul, maybe eventually get the trade agreement, but your options are limited. You need to do either the quest battle to see Ulfwan, or to do Return of the Prince in order to gain the opportunity to confederate Kalador. You don't want Kalador itself, but let me explain what this is all about. So you take these elements and then you get this particular event. Now, you do want to get that confederation with Kalador. Ideally, you will have built up enough influence. This is, by the way, why I took it more slowly, because you can do it faster. But you want to ideally get to pay 25 influence to get favors abound, because that will give you that diplomatic relations benefit. Now, there are some problems in Kalador. In this situation, it seems they've done well by taking some of Tyrannok's territory, because Noctilus didn't attack them. But you don't want Kalador's territory. What you want to do is start building diplomatic relations with Imrik and with other High Elven factions. That will generate you the money that you need in order to survive during the course of this campaign. That's what you're really, really after over here in this particular campaign situation. Nothing else. Although in this case, I am a bit tempted to just take this territory for myself, merge these armies, and of course take Terra, because I'm not sure if Noctilus is anywhere. But generally speaking, no, he's got a weird thing in this campaign by taking the Griffin Gate. But hey, that suits me. Most of the time, though, he will literally just take Kalador. So this is a bit of an exceptional situation. Most of the time, you just sell Kalador to Imrik in order to get better diplomatic relations with him. Though in this case, that doesn't seem like it's necessary, but I still probably wouldn't keep Kalador in this campaign. Just get those agreements, get that defensive alliance, get those diplomatic relations, and eventually you will be able to confederate Ulfwan. Your campaign is in the east. You do need to take out Clan Rictus, you do need to take down a Kugaf, you do need to encounter the dragons, and long campaign you need to deal with Clan Moor. So fighting a campaign on two fronts is not a recipe of success. What can I say? So don't bother with Ulfwan until much later on in your campaign. I guess that is one of the few benefits of Imrik's campaign, that he does have the only High Elven campaign where you can just basically say, you know what, I don't care about Ulfwan, I can ignore it. Of course, ignoring the fact that Ulfwan is an amazing breadbasket for the High Elves. Now, the problem for Imrik is he's got a minor dwarven faction to him, but the event will only start after you've completed a turn. So you're wasting time to do that stupid quest. Why he doesn't start with that quest from the beginning, I don't know. I can't really tell you. It's annoying to do it. Like, to actually achieve it by capturing the settlement Crookback Mountain, I actually had to cheese it a bit, because the way it works is like you can sack a settlement one turn, and then the next turn occupy it, and it will count both times. Generally, it shouldn't, but it will. So it's a really stupid confederation system. Imrik has been a free legendary lord, and it does obviously show in terms of his campaign design in a significant number of ways over here. Now, on top of that, there are, of course, other problems, like the lack of trading partners. The territory itself isn't particularly great, because it's not benefiting the High Elves. Like, the Darklands kind of suck right now, and I'm not sure if it's necessarily going to get better with the release of the Chaos Dwarves. So this placing on the list might soon become irrelevant if Creative Assembly uses the opportunity of the Chaos Dwarf release to actually really improve Imrik's campaign in Immortal Empires by rebuilding Darklands and making a much better province. But even if they do that, there's still going to be issues that are going to come up. So you're vulnerable from the south in the Broken Teeth. You can't take it because there's a Skaven faction with a full tier 5 army over here in the capital. So taking this is a bad idea. That means you're vulnerable from quick taking these territories. You could take them yourself and invade them, but that is a bit annoying. And of course, that leaves you vulnerable from the north. And even if you eliminate Clan Rictus, then grats, you still have the Darkland Orcs, you still have Skarsnik, you still and eventually have Grimgore. I'd probably say in this campaign that the best thing you could do would be to try and eliminate Skarsnik yourself. Like, take Mount Silverspear, take the World Edge Archway, sell that to Thorgrim, get those relations going with Thorgrim, and give this territory to him, and then move down south. That's not a great campaign plan when you're having to hop around the area like that. Most of the time, I would say it's really terrible, but it's probably the best plan that Imrik has. Just running around, trying to put down these fires all over the place in his territory. Not a great situation by any stretch of imagination. Now, if you're able to stomach doing all of that, yes, you do have power in this campaign. You will get those dragons, but it is a rough campaign start, and it's also a rough early game because, like, it's not gonna end. Like, it's not gonna get better until you deal with Grimgore, most likely. Now, thankfully, most of the territory is available for you to take, but until you've dealt with Grimgore or made an alliance with dwarves and given them the Wolflands to hold against the Greenskins to the north, taking some of this territory, maybe giving that to them as well. Dealt to Kugaf, dealt to Clan Morse, Scarbrand, Serra. Till then, it's just a really rough campaign situation. Another thing that's also a problem is navigating the mountains when you don't have the Underway. Navigating the mountains without the Underway is a significant issue. For Imrik, who has so much territory to cover because his settlements can be so spread out, is an even bigger concern to deal with. So those are the problems in this particular campaign. You do have a good army, but a very limited economy. You're going to struggle to maintain more than one army. And by the way, this army is not a good army. It's just like, it's basically what you'd call a crap stack in the game. Like, obviously Imrik with his dragon princess, his dragon, his hero, and himself, they're powerful, but the army itself is not really that substantial. So you do have a lot of annoyances to deal with in this campaign, and you have no really good campaign expansion plan. Yes, eventually you can stabilize it by dealing with all the factions around here, but damn, that campaign start is going to be rough. And by the way, you can lose Calador. You may not be able to get Calador. You might even fail your objective because Noctilus can just wipe out. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he does something like he did here, but he can also just wipe them out very, very, very quickly, which obviously it would be an issue in this campaign. Though you can get vision with to Ulfwan using your quest over here, because you do have a quest bell right over here that will give you vision over a portion of Ulfwan. Though the problem is you need Alariel to actually come over here so you can actually see her, or you need her to at least take the gate so you can see her and start getting diplomatic relations. So certainly some issues over here in this campaign. Just really bad design, bad plan, bad overall situation. Imrik does tend to do well with AI, but again, the AI cheats on the highest difficulties. It's like, oh, extra recruitment slots, less upkeep, stronger economy, good growth, good control. You don't have any of those benefits. It is interesting that Imrik does tend to do well, but then again, every High Elven Legendary Lord, when controlled by the AI on higher difficulties, does well. You have the Doomtide of the High Elves from Ulthuan, and while Alif Anar is generally a footnote if you do start next to him, the problem is, like, if he could stabilize the situation, he would also be incredibly powerful, even when controlled by the AI. So he's not getting bonus points for that, really, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, rough situation, just bad design. Is better than Warhammer 2 from my perspective, because they're, at least from some ways, like, it's worse probably in the mid-long term, but it's certainly a lot better early on, because early on in Immortal Empires in Warhammer 2, you had to deal with Snitch, and dealing with 2 free stacks of Skaven across Territoria was really difficult to navigate there, was not fun at all as a campaign situation. Finally, at number 1 on this list, not my own personal number 1, but I do understand why people voted him so overwhelmingly even, is Grand Hierophant Khatep. Khatep does have a lot of power. He does get a right cost of minus 25%, he gets 2 hero capacity to Lich Priest, and Mortuary Cult crafting cost of minus 25%. So he does have a pretty good campaign situation in a lot of ways. In terms of campaign benefits, lord effects, I mean, the guy can get an artillery piece as a mount. That is ridiculously powerful. The Casket of Souls is very difficult to get otherwise. So you get a bunch of benefits, you have a powerful army, a weak enemy to deal with, and none of the factions around you utterly despise you. Like, they don't necessarily like you all that much, but they don't hate you that much. And so you have the flexibility to decide who you're going to go to war with and how. However, that's where the benefits end. Now, the problem in this campaign is that the territory around you, in particular the frozen territory, isn't that great. And you do want to at least take some of it because you need one of the books of Nagash, or you want to get one of the books of Nagash that is over here in Morafi's home territory. So you're going to end up in a war with Morafi. But the territorial issue and having to enter in a war with Morafi to get one of the books, those aren't necessarily the biggest problems, because you do at least have the Ashen Coast, and you could take the Ashen Coast, come over here, deal with Morafi along the way, of course, sell Morafi's territory to Mazdamundi, make a good diplomatic deal with him, maybe in the north deal with Tarek, sell some of the territory to Grombrindal. You do have some diplomatic choices. It isn't complete and utter misery from a start position standpoint. Here's the problem, though, of this particular campaign. In order to win this campaign, or to achieve your victory conditions, you need to make your way back to Khemri. That's pretty horrible from where you're at. Now, it wouldn't necessarily be so horrible if a lot of the terrain along the way wasn't unsuitable, but Khemri is over here, you start over here. It is a horrible journey to make, especially via Lustria. Now, you do have an alternative, but it isn't necessarily that much better. It can be something of an adventure, and it can work better than the Lustrian one, at least. You take a sea lane, you end up in Cafe, you take the river route, you end up over here, you start conquering territory along the way in the southern mountains of Morn, and of course in the Darklands. Or you just bypass all of these armies and just move along until you end up somewhere around here. But it is genuine misery, because you're talking about dozens and dozens of turns, even if you're not fighting anything, just to get to your core territory. Not exactly a great campaign situation. And here's the stupid thing. When you arrive there, you pretty much have to fight every other faction there, because you need the pyramids in order to... This is the annoying factor about the Tomb King campaigns, and it's certainly an annoying factor for others, but I would say Khatep has the worst situation out of all of them, because you can't confederate other legendary lords of the Tomb Kings if you're playing one, and you need the pyramids, all of these core territories, to win your campaign. Now, this is a pretty substantial issue in general for them, because it means you're not making military alliances that would naturally come to you, because you need those pyramids, like Xandri, for instance, or some other places. You're not doing that you want those pyramids for yourself. Can lead to some really stupid campaign decisions just because of the pyramids to achieve the long campaign victory condition. Khatep, who literally freed Cetra, or got him to come back from the dead, having to fight Cetra is ridiculous. And it's really bad design. Just marching away halfway across the world to fight the factions over here to capture the territory to win your campaign. The victory conditions need to be changed. Though, to be fair, even if they were changed, this campaign, because of all the territory that's unsuitable next to him, and the fact that he does lack the ability to get any suitable territory for a fairly long time, it still wouldn't be a great situation. But just changing the victory conditions alone would be much better. If Khatep had frozen territory and different campaign victory conditions, it would be a much, much better campaign than it is. Like, that's all you need to do. It's not necessarily hard to fix this situation, actually. Like, just change these victory conditions, remove the holding these settlements, change the terrain type around here, and also change the way the Books of Nagash are, because that's always a bit of an annoying factor. Speaking about the Books of Nagash, right, you want to go to Khemri, but the thing is, the Books of Nagash are over here, in this particular area. By the way, fun stuff. You want to invade Ulthuan for one of the Books of Nagash, and you're going to end up in a war with Tyrion, and you want to invade Bretonnia. That is always a fun situation. Morathi, Tyrion, Bretonnia, Mazdamundi himself. Oh, great. Picking a fight on Mazdamundi. Who you wouldn't want to pick a fight with, actually. You would want to make a diplomatic deal with Mazdamundi, take Morathi's territory, give it to him, but he has one of the books. And the thing is, the books, like, you may decide not to care about some of the books, but some of these books are can give you significant benefits. So, of course, the benefits, what book is where, is always randomized. For instance, here, you can get the 5th book of Nagash in Morathi's territory, and that might be the best one to have over there, because you're quite capable of dealing with Morathi pretty quickly in this campaign, before she becomes a major issue. Though I kind of feel Morathi has been nerfed in Warhammer 1 versus Warhammer 2. That is just my impression. But you do have a lot of campaign power. You have a great deal of magic. Like, if you're playing campaign in this area, one of the things I really dislike having to do is fighting Khatep, because he has a really powerful army, powerful magic, powerful artillery that just smacks your units really, really hard. He isn't easy to deal with. He has that power. It's just, his campaign situation is genuinely awful. It could be fixed. It could be improved. Just 3 things would make this campaign and the Tomb Kings in general much, much better. Or 4 things. 1, confederation with other Tomb King legendary lords, at least between Khatep and Cetra, would make a lot more sense. Or Khatep, Cetra, and Khalida would make a lot more sense, because they did work together in the lore, actually. Not Archaon necessarily, but Archaon is already ridiculous enough in terms of power level. Not forcing you to take out settlements of factions that you might want to ally in order to gain the Books of Nagash. So being able to get it with a military alliance would be great. Getting those books would be great. The system is already in there in the game. Not having victory conditions like this, at least as Khatep, and having more suitable terrain types next to you. I mean, it's great he can take mountains and moistand, sure, but not being able to take frozen when he starts with literally next to an Agrand is just silly, as far as I see it. Anyway, that's all there is to say. Questine here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.